They say home is where you feel safe. But what happens when the very people meant to protect your neighborhood turn it into a battlefield? My wife and I thought we were moving into a quiet, peaceful community, but instead, we found ourselves under attack by the HOA's self-proclaimed enforcer. She wasn't just petty, she was ruthless, ready to use every rule and threat to drive us out. But what she didn't know was that one piece of plastic in my wife's wallet would turn the tables overnight. When my wife and I first moved into the neighborhood, we weren't looking for drama. We were looking for peace. After years of moving from base to base, from one noisy apartment complex to the next, we finally wanted stability. A home where the days didn't feel borrowed, where we could build a life without the constant shadow of transition. The little cul-de-sac we chose seemed like the perfect place. Neatly trimmed lawns, kids riding their bikes after school, neighbors waving as they pulled into their driveways. On the surface, it felt like the kind of community we had always dreamed of. Our house wasn't the biggest on the block, but to us, it was everything. A modest two-story with a small front porch, just enough space to plant flowers, and a backyard where we pictured cookouts and quiet evenings. My wife wasted no time making it feel like home. She painted the front door a cheerful shade of blue, hung a wreath that changed with every season, and started a small garden along the walkway. It wasn't grand, but it was ours. At first, life in the neighborhood seemed idyllic. We exchanged polite conversations with a few neighbors, joined in the occasional block party, and paid our HOA dues without question. For a while, it felt like we had found the kind of community that people write about: safe, orderly, predictable. But beneath that polished surface, there were cracks we hadn't yet noticed. Every neighborhood has that one person, the one who believes rules are meant not just to guide, but to control. In our case, that person was a woman I'll call Karen. She was on the HOA board, and if you asked anyone, they'd say she practically was the HOA. Always patrolling the streets, clipboard in hand, snapping pictures of trash cans left out a little too long, or grass blades an inch too tall. She didn't just enforce the rules, she hunted for violations like it was her full-time job. At first, she barely noticed us. A polite nod here, a stiff smile there. But it wasn't long before we started getting letters. Harmless at first, a note about the color of our curtains not being uniform with community standards, or a reminder that holiday decorations should come down no later than January 5th. Small things, petty things, things that made us roll our eyes but not fight back. We thought it was just part of living under an HOA. Annoying, yes, but manageable. We told ourselves not to stir the pot, not to give her any reason to target us more than she already was. But that strategy didn't last long, because for people like Karen, it's not enough to be noticed. They need to be obeyed. The first real clash came over something we never expected: my wife's car. A perfectly ordinary, well-kept vehicle parked neatly in our own driveway. Yet somehow, it became the trigger for a spiral of accusations, threats, and escalating demands that would change everything. Looking back now, the warning signs were always there. The clipped tone in her voice, the way she lingered outside our house a little too long, the letters piling up faster than we could read them. We just didn't realize how far she was willing to go, and how much she underestimated us. Because the very rule she tried to use to drive us out would become the one that exposed her. It started small, as these things often do. A letter in the mailbox, folded neatly into an envelope stamped with the HOA seal. At first, I thought it was routine, maybe an announcement about a neighborhood event or a reminder about trash collection. But when I opened it, my stomach dropped. According to the notice, my wife's car, a car she had driven for years without a single complaint, was now in violation of community standards. The reasoning? It wasn't authorized for overnight driveway parking. The letter claimed that cars in driveways diminished the visual harmony of the neighborhood. We were instructed to move it into the garage immediately or face a $50 fine for every night it remained outside. It was ridiculous. Our garage already held my car and storage from years of moving, and nowhere in the HOA's own handbook did it say anything about driveways being off-limits. But when we called to question it, Karen herself picked up the phone. Her voice was sharp, clipped, the kind of tone that carried an unspoken message. "Don't argue with me." "Well, the rules are clear," she said. "If you have a garage, you must use it for vehicles. Driveways are not long-term parking zones." I pushed back, pointing out that half the neighbors parked in their driveways every single night. Why weren't they getting notices? Her answer was chilling in its simplicity. "They're not the problem. You are." That was the moment I realized this wasn't about rules. It was personal. Image 5. HOA meeting begins. The following week, more letters came. One about the height of our grass, another about the non-conforming flower pots on our porch. She even flagged the welcome mat by our front door as unsightly. Each letter came with a fine attached. $25, $50, $75. It added up fast. We weren't the only ones who noticed. A few neighbors pulled me aside, whispering that Karen had picked her new target. Apparently, this was a pattern. Every few months, she found someone new to zero in on, a family who had just moved in, or anyone who dared to stand up to her. And once you were in her sights, she wouldn't stop until you either bent to her will or left. Still, we tried to reason with her. My wife wrote emails citing the HOA's own bylaws, showing that nothing we were doing was against the rules. Each time, Karen responded with more accusations, twisting the language of the handbook to suit her agenda. When we refused to pay the bogus fines, she escalated, warning that continued non-compliance could result in liens against our property. Imagine that. The home we had worked so hard for, threatened because of a flower pot and a parked car. The breaking point came one Saturday morning. We were eating breakfast when a knock rattled the front door. I opened it to find Karen standing on our porch, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched like a shield. She didn't say hello. She didn't even look me in the eye. "I'm issuing a final notice," she said coldly. "Your wife's vehicle must be removed from the driveway within 48 hours. If not, we'll begin the eviction process." The word hit me like a punch. Eviction. From our own home. For a parked car. I felt my fists clench, but my wife touched my arm, keeping me calm. She stepped forward, her voice steady but firm. "This is harassment," she told her. "We're not breaking any rules." Karen didn't flinch. "Then you can take it up with the board," she replied. And with that, she turned on her heel and walked away, her clipboard swinging like a weapon. The following days were a blur of tension. We barely slept, wondering what she'd try next. And then it came. A certified letter, stamped and official-looking, accusing us of persistent violations and scheduling a hearing before the HOA board. The hearing was set for a Tuesday evening in the community clubhouse. I'll never forget walking in and seeing Karen already seated at the front table, flanked by two other board members who looked more like her allies than impartial judges. A few neighbors trickled in to observe, their faces tight with unease. Karen laid out her case with the confidence of someone who believed she'd already won. She listed every supposed violation, from the curtains to the car, painting us as reckless homeowners who had no respect for the community. She even pulled out photos, grainy shots she had taken while lurking outside our house. When it was our turn to speak, my wife stood tall, calm, composed, but with a fire in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. She explained each accusation, one by one, pointing to the bylaws that proved we were in compliance. She asked why other homeowners weren't being fined for the same violations. She asked why Karen's complaints seemed to fall only on us. By the time she was done, the room was silent. Even some of Karen's allies shifted uncomfortably. But Karen wasn't done. With a smirk, she dropped her final card. Regardless of the bylaws, this board has the authority to determine what is and isn't acceptable for the good of the community, she declared. And we find these violations unacceptable. In other words, rules didn't matter. She was the rule. The board voted to uphold the fines and threatened further action if we didn't comply. We walked out of that meeting stunned, humiliated, and angry. But beneath the anger was something stronger. Resolve. If Karen thought we would bow down, she was wrong. Gee. The next weeks became a battle. Karen ramped up her harassment, sending notices almost daily. At one point, she even had a tow truck cruise by our house, as if to intimidate us into moving the car. Neighbors began whispering again, some urging us to fight, others warning us that no one had ever beaten her. The stress was suffocating. Every time I checked the mailbox, my hands shook, wondering what new accusation awaited. Every time we saw her walking down the street, my blood boiled. But my wife, she stayed calm. She had something Karen didn't know, something that would flip the script entirely. You see, Karen had made a fatal mistake. In her obsession with control, she never once considered who she was actually dealing with. She assumed we were just another couple she could push around. But my wife had spent years serving this country. She carried an ID that not only proved her service, but carried protections that Karen and the HOA had no power over. And when the time came, that one piece of plastic would silence Karen in a way she never saw coming. The second hearing was supposed to be routine. At least, that's what Karen thought. After weeks of threats, fines, and intimidation, she was certain we'd either given up or finally caved in. She strutted into the community clubhouse like a queen returning to her throne, clipboard clutched under her arm, lips curled into that smug half-smile she always wore when she thought she had the upper hand. But this time, we weren't the same couple who had walked into that room weeks before. This time, we came prepared. The room was fuller than before. Word of Karen's vendetta had spread, and neighbors who had once stayed silent now came out of curiosity, or maybe hope. Hope that someone might finally stand up to her. I noticed the whispers as we took our seats. That's the couple she's going after. Do you think they'll last? Maybe this is it. Karen called the meeting to order with her usual false politeness, banging the gavel like a judge about to deliver a sentence. She started rattling off the same tired list of violations: the car in the driveway, the flower pots, the curtains. She even pulled out a new accusation, claiming our backyard shed was non-compliant. Each point she delivered with an air of superiority, glancing at the board members who nodded along like obedient soldiers. But then came the moment she'd been waiting for. With continued non-compliance, she announced, the board is now moving forward with formal eviction proceedings. This couple has proven themselves unwilling to abide by the community's rules, and therefore they no longer belong here. Gasps rippled through the room. Even some of her supporters shifted uncomfortably. Eviction. It was the nuclear option, the kind of punishment no one had ever actually seen carried out in our neighborhood. Karen looked directly at us, her eyes gleaming with triumph. She thought she had broken us. That's when my wife stood up, calm, collected, unshaken. She didn't raise her voice, didn't let anger take over. Instead, she pulled her wallet from her purse, slid a small card out, and placed it on the table for everyone to see. This, she said firmly, is my military ID. For a moment, silence filled the room. Karen blinked, confused, as if the significance hadn't hit her yet. But it hit everyone else. Heads turned, whispers started. A few neighbors leaned forward, their eyes wide. My wife continued. As an active service member, I am protected under federal law. The Service Members Civil Relief Act specifically prohibits actions like this: harassment, unlawful fines, and especially eviction proceedings. What you are doing isn't just petty, it's illegal. The color drained from Karen's face. She stammered, searching for words, but for once none came. The confidence she had worn like armor cracked right there in front of the entire community. And my wife wasn't finished. We have documented every notice, every fine, every attempt at intimidation. We've spoken to legal counsel, and we're prepared to escalate this to state and federal authorities if necessary. If this board wants to continue down this path, you won't just be facing us. You'll be facing the U.S. government. The effect was immediate. One of the board members shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing at Karen with something that looked dangerously close to panic. Another cleared his throat and mumbled that maybe they should reconsider the approach. But Karen, desperate to salvage control, tried to laugh it off. "Military ID or not," she sneered, "the board has authority here. Rules are rules." My wife's response was sharp as steel. "No, laws are laws, and you are breaking them." That line landed like a hammer. The room erupted in murmurs. Some neighbors even clapped quietly, their courage finally surfacing now that someone had stood up to her. Karen's mask slipped completely then. She snapped, slamming her hand on the table. "You think you can defy me? You think some piece of plastic means you're above the rules?" My wife didn't flinch. She leaned forward, locked eyes with her, and said the words that ended it all. "No, it means you're not above the law." The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, Karen wasn't in control. She wasn't feared. She was exposed. The board, sensing the shift in the room, scrambled to cover themselves. One quickly suggested tabling the eviction for further review. Another insisted they needed more time to study the legal implications. But everyone knew the truth. Karen had lost. In that moment, the power she had wielded so ruthlessly began to crumble. Neighbors who had once cowered under her threats now saw her for what she was. Not an authority, not a protector of the community, but a bully who had finally gone too far. And as we walked out of that clubhouse, heads turned. Not in pity, not in fear, but in quiet respect. For the first time, people saw that Karen wasn't untouchable. But here's the thing about people like Karen. They don't just back down quietly. Exposed and humiliated, she wasn't done with us yet. What followed was the fallout of her defeat and the way it rippled through the entire neighborhood.
Gavin Newsom slams John Kennedy as selfish and inhumane. John's savage reply stuns everyone. The sun had barely risen over Sacramento when a single tweet from California Governor Gavin Newsom ignited a firestorm across the nation. In bold, accusatory words, he branded Senator John Neely Kennedy of Louisiana as selfish and inhumane, claiming the senator was gallivanting at Disneyland while families in California struggled under the weight of economic hardship. Attached to the tweet was a damning photograph, Kennedy with his unmistakable Southern charm, smiling broadly amidst a crowd of laughing children. The iconic Sleeping Beauty castle gleaming in the background. The image meant to paint Kennedy as callous and out of touch spread like wildfire across social media. Within minutes, hashtags like GeoKennyExposed and Chi Disneyland Scandal were trending on X each post, amplifying the outrage with a fervor that seemed to pulse through the digital veins of America.